The year was 1878, and the wind that swept across the Arizona territory carried both dust and destiny. The desert was not a place for softness, and it was a crucible, a vast stretch of earth that burned away the frail and left behind only the strong, the stubborn, and the scarred. Into this land came Clara Whitmore, a woman of fine Boston breeding, stepping down from the westbound stagecoach in a swirl of calico and uncertainty. Her parasol did little to shield her from the blaze of the noonday sun. The town of Silver Creek was little more than a cluster of rough-hewn buildings and a crooked sign creaking above the saloon door. A place of grit and whispers where lawmen and drifters shared the same whiskey, and women watched the horizon for men who never came home. Clara was not built for such a place. At least, that's what the townsfolk said when they saw her lace gloves and Eastern manners, but they didn't know the stubbornness that lived beneath her soft voice. Her father, a scholar of botany, had raised her with ink-stained fingers and wild ideas. When he died, Clara took up his unfinished work, a study of the desert's healing plants, and against her family's pleas, set out west to finish what he started. She rented a small cabin near the San Pedro River, where the land softened into ripples of mesquite and cottonwood. Every morning she set out with her sketchbook and satchel, collecting roots and blossoms, making careful notes by the fading light. The desert, once cruel and alien, began to speak to her. Its silence was not emptiness, it was presence ancient and patient. One evening, as the sun dipped low, bleeding crimson over the mesas, she wandered farther than usual, following a glint of water between the reeds. The river shimmered like liquid gold. She knelt by the bank to sketch a cluster of white desert lilies growing at the edge, their petals trembling in the wind. That's when she felt it, the distinct weight of being watched. She lifted her eyes. Across the narrow river, half in shadow, stood a man. He was tall, bare-chested, with the lean strength of someone carved from the land itself. His dark hair was tied with leather, and his eyes, sharp as obsidian, watched her with quiet curiosity. His presence was neither threatening nor shy. He stood like a spirit of the desert, rooted in silence. For a long moment neither moved. Clara's heart fluttered in her chest. She had heard tales, whispers of Apache riders, warriors who moved like ghosts through the canyons. But this man, though proud and still, did not look at her as an intruder. He looked at her as though trying to understand what sort of creature she was. A pale figure from a world that did not belong here. She found her voice, though it came out softer than she intended. "Good evening," she said, the words trembling in the air. He did not reply, only tilted his head slightly, studying her. The sunlight caught the copper lines of his face, strong, unreadable, and yet filled with life. Then, as silently as he had appeared, he turned and vanished into the reeds, leaving only ripples behind. For a long while, Clara remained there, staring at the empty bank. The desert had never felt so alive. Days passed, but the image of him, the Apache king as she came to think of him, stayed with her. She asked no one about him, fearing what small-town mouths might say. Yet every time she walked near the river, she felt his unseen presence. Once she found a wildflower placed upon a rock near where she sketched, a bloom not native to that part of the river. Another time she thought she heard the soft rhythm of a drum echoing in the canyon wind. It was as if the land itself conspired to bring them together. Then, one morning, fate obliged. Clara was out gathering roots when her horse spooked at the sudden crack of gunfire in the distance. She tried to calm the animal, but her boot slipped and she tumbled down the embankment, twisting her ankle sharply. Pain shot through her, sharp as lightning. She tried to stand, but her leg gave way beneath her. Moments later he appeared, silent as before, emerging from the brush like the desert's own shadow. His eyes met hers, and though he said nothing, his gaze was steady, filled with a calm strength that eased her fear. "You," she whispered, recognizing him. "You were by the river." He nodded once, kneeling beside her. His hands, though calloused, were gentle as he examined her ankle. She winced, and he spoke finally, his English rough but deep with quiet command. "Not broken. You rest." Before she could protest, he lifted her into his arms. Clara gasped, surprised by his strength, the way his chest moved like steady thunder beneath her touch. He carried her through the canyon, his stride sure as if he had walked these lands since time itself began. The scent of sage and dust surrounded them. He brought her to a shaded hollow by the river where water trickled over stones. He soaked a strip of soft hide in the cool stream and wrapped it around her ankle. When he looked up, their eyes met again. Closer this time, unguarded. "I am Taza," he said simply. "Clara," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. He repeated her name slowly, shaping it with care. "Clara." It sounded different in his mouth, softer, deeper, like a secret spoken to the wind. For the rest of the afternoon, he stayed near, tending to her with quiet patience. When she tried to thank him, he only shook his head. "Desert takes care of its own," he said. When he finally rose to leave, she felt an ache, sudden and strange. "Will I see you again?" she asked. He paused at the edge of the water, glancing back. "The river knows," he said. Then he was gone. That night, Clara lay awake beneath the desert stars, the air thick with heat and mystery. Somewhere beyond the dark hills, drums echoed faintly, slow, rhythmic like the beating of a heart. She knew the world would never look the same again. The desert had tested her, shaped her. But now something more than survival stirred in her chest. It was curiosity, wonder, and a longing she could not name. And though she did not yet know it, the path she'd begun that day, the path that led from the civilized East to the wild, untamed heart of the Apache lands, would change everything she believed about love, loyalty, and freedom, for in the heart of that vast, unforgiving country, the desert had chosen its rose, and the man called Taza had already begun to bloom within her soul. The days after that meeting at the river passed like whispered secrets. Clara returned to her cabin by the San Pedro, but the rhythm of her heart had changed. The world she'd known, neat gardens, quiet parlors, the sound of piano keys under soft hands, seemed a distant echo. Out here, the earth itself was a living thing, humming beneath her feet. And always, somewhere unseen, she felt him. Taza. His name lingered on her tongue like a prayer she didn't dare speak aloud. She saw him again a week later, or rather, he allowed himself to be seen. She was collecting sage near the old canyon trail when his shadow crossed hers. He stood just beyond the ridge, a bough slung across his back, a half-smile ghosting over his lips. "Your foot," he said, gesturing downward. "Healed," she answered, trying not to sound too eager. He nodded, his eyes catching sunlight like dark glass. "You walk strong now." That small exchange was the beginning. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed more often, sometimes by accident, sometimes not. He showed her how to find clean water in dry land, how to follow the trail of deer without leaving footprints. She taught him English words for plants, sketching them in her notebook while he told her their Apache names. "Willow," she said once, drawing the long, drooping leaves. "Chill," he replied, tapping the page. "Good for pain." When he smiled, it wasn't the quick charm of a town man. It was slow, deliberate, the kind that warmed through the skin and stayed in the heart. One afternoon, she gathered courage to ask what she had long wondered. "Are you a leader among your people?" Taza hesitated, then looked toward the horizon where distant smoke curled from a campfire. "My father was," he said quietly. "Now I am, for those who remain." Clara had heard the stories. The soldiers called the Apache savages, raiders, thieves. But sitting beside him, listening to the steady calm of his voice, she knew the truth was not that simple. His people were hunters, healers, guardians of a land that had been theirs since before maps were drawn. They fought because they were being erased. "You live between worlds," she said softly. "The land of your fathers, and the land of those who take it." He studied her and for a long time said nothing. Then with quiet conviction he answered, "You too live between worlds, Clara Whitmore, the one you left behind, and the one that now holds your heart." His words struck something deep within her. Silver Creek's townsfolk soon began to talk. They saw her wandering farther from the cabin, saw the feathered trinket she wore now around her neck, a gift from Taza. The whispers grew sharp as cactus spines. "Boston girl's gone wild," one man sneered at the saloon. "She's consorting with the Apache," muttered another. "If she ain't careful, she'll end up scalped or worse." Even Reverend Thompson called at her cabin, hat in hand, voice trembling with polite outrage. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you must remember your place. These people are dangerous. You bring shame upon yourself mingling with them." Clara stood firm, her chin lifted. "These people have names, Reverend," she replied. and I've found more kindness among them than in all your sermons." He left red-faced, muttering about sin and salvation. Yet that night, under a sky heavy with stars, Clara's hand shook as she lit her lantern. Fear gnawed at her, not of Taza, but of what she was becoming. She was no longer the dutiful daughter of New England. She was a woman who felt the desert breathing through her veins, who longed for the sound of a warrior's voice in the wind. The turning point came when she was invited, or rather, permitted, aren't you, to visit his people. Taza met her at dusk, leading her through narrow canyons painted in red twilight. The air smelled of smoke and sage. When they emerged into a hidden valley, Clara's breath caught. Dozens of Apache shelters made from branches and hides stood among cottonwoods. Children played near the stream. Women ground maize with rhythmic patience. Old men watched her quietly, their eyes filled with both caution and curiosity. Taza introduced her in their tongue, his voice low but strong. The people nodded, some smiling faintly, others wary. One elder woman pressed a hand to Clara's heart, murmuring something she didn't understand. Later, Taza told her the meaning. She said, "Your spirit walks softly, like rain after drought." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. That night, as drums pulsed like a heartbeat through the camp, Clara sat beside Taza near the fire. He told her stories of the old ways, of the sacred mountain where the sun first rose, of warriors who spoke with eagles, of spirits that lived in the stones. She listened, entranced, feeling the veil between their worlds grow thinner with each word. When he spoke of his father, a great chief betrayed by soldiers under a white flag, his voice faltered. She reached out without thinking, laying her hand over his. His skin was warm, calloused, alive. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He turned to her, the firelight painting gold across his face. "The past cannot be mended," he said, "but the heart can still be true." They sat like that for a long time, and no words, no need. Just two souls bound by the same ache, one born of loss, the other of awakening. As summer deepened, Clara's devotion to her work and to Taza grew. She began writing not just about plants, but about people, the healing chants of the medicine men, the uses of yucca root and willow bark, the songs sung to newborns beneath the stars. She wanted the world to know the Apache were not beasts or bandits. They were poets of survival. But the world was not ready to listen. One morning she awoke to find U.S. cavalry riders outside her cabin. Their officer, a cold-eyed man named Captain Harlan, demanded to know about the Indian camp upriver. He accused her of aiding rebels, of passing supplies. Clara denied it, but her trembling hands betrayed her fear. "Ma'am," he warned, "you'd do well to remember which side of the flag you're on." When they rode off, leaving a trail of dust and dread, Clara knew the fragile peace was breaking. She went to the river that evening. Taza was there, as if he'd felt her fear through the wind itself. "They know," she said. "The soldiers, they know about your camp." He looked at her steadily. "Then the time of words is ending." "No," she pleaded, gripping his arm. "There must be another way." But Taza only shook his head. "The white man listens only to thunder, and soon they will bring it." The setting sun cast his face in bronze and shadow. He reached out then, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, a touch both tender and tragic. "You have a brave heart, Clara Whitmore," he said softly. "But your world and mine are not kind to love." Her throat tightened. "Then we will make our own world," she whispered. Taza smiled faintly, the sadness in his eyes deeper than any desert night. "Between two worlds," he murmured. "If such a place can exist, it will be where the river runs forever." And with that he turned and walked into the darkness. That night, Clara wrote by lantern light, her hand trembling over the page. The world was indeed divided by color, creed, and blood, but somewhere between all that cruelty, two souls had found each other. The desert wind moaned against her window, carrying the faint echo of drums. And Clara knew in her heart that love, true, wild, forbidden love, was never meant to live quietly. It was meant to burn. The monsoon clouds had begun to gather over the Arizona sky, heavy with the promise of rain. The land, cracked and thirsty, seemed to hold its breath. Every leaf, every blade of grass waited for the first drop that would cool its burning heart. So too did Clara Whitmore wait, not for rain, but for Taza. Days had passed since the warning she gave him. Each sunset brought her to the river, and each sunrise found her still alone. She feared the soldiers might have driven him farther into the mountains or worse. Her heart, that once beat with the calm rhythm of reason, now thundered with longing and dread. Then one twilight, as the horizon blazed with copper fire, he came. He appeared from the shadows as the cicadas sang. His step was silent, his expression unreadable, but the sight of him struck her breathless. He looked weary, dust streaking his face, his hair unbound, eyes dark with something deeper than exhaustion. "You're hurt," she gasped. Rushing to him, he shook his head, though a smear of blood marked his arm. "Not mine," he said. "We lost 2 of our young men. The soldiers came at dawn." Her throat tightened. "Oh, Taza." "They do not stop," he said bitterly. "Every promise broken, every treaty burned." She reached for his hand, trembling. "Then let me help, please. There must be a way." He looked at her then, and for a heartbeat the warrior fell away, revealing the man beneath. "You cannot change what men like them have already decided," he said softly. "But still you come. Still you risk yourself." "I don't care," she whispered fiercely. "Let them talk, let them threaten. I belong where my heart leads me." A faint smile touched his lips, the ghost of warmth in the storm of his sorrow. "And where does your heart lead you, Clara Whitmore?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Here. To you." The words hung in the air like a sacred vow. The river flowed quietly beside them, its surface catching the reflection of dying sunlight. A hush fell, not awkward but ancient, as if the earth itself paused to listen. The scent of rain, sharp and wild, mingled with the breath of dust. Without a word, Taza stepped into the water, wading until it reached his knees. He turned back to her, eyes glinting with something that pulled at the very fabric of her soul. "Come," he said simply. She hesitated, not out of fear but of wonder. The river shimmered between them, a border between 2 worlds, between the life she'd been born into and the one she had chosen. Slowly, she untied the laces at her throat. The fabric of her dress slipped from her shoulders, falling in a whisper to the ground. The setting sun caught her pale skin, painting it gold. She stepped forward, barefoot, the water cool against her calves. Then her thighs. Taza watched her in silence, not with hunger, but reverence, as though she were a spirit made flesh. When she reached him, the current swirled gently around them. The world beyond the banks vanished. No soldiers, no towns, no laws. Only the whisper of water, the soft rush of breath, and the nearness of 2 hearts defying everything that sought to divide them. Her voice broke the silence, trembling, tender. "Do you like what you see?" His gaze met hers, dark, unblinking, infinite. "I see my heart," he said simply. Time seemed to stop. The first raindrop fell, shattering the river's stillness, then another. Within moments, the storm broke. Thunder rolling through the canyons, lightning tearing the sky. But neither moved. Rain poured over them, washing away dust, fear, and doubt. Clara laughed, the sound wild and pure. Taza caught her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the rain, or perhaps her tears. Their lips met, not as strangers, not as enemies, but as equals, as souls long divided, now joined by something older than either of their worlds. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce, desperate, a promise made against time itself. When they finally parted, the rain softened to a steady whisper. She leaned against his chest, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the storm's fading growl. "I wish the world could stay like this," she murmured. "Just the river, just us." He pressed his forehead to hers. "The world beyond will not understand. But this," he touched her cheek, "is ours, always." The days that followed became their stolen eternity. They met by the river each evening, speaking softly beneath the cottonwoods, their laughter mingling with the sound of flowing water. She learned his tongue, haltingly, imperfectly, and he hers, their conversations bridging centuries of difference. He told her of the sacred stones hidden in the cliffs, of the spirits that guarded the desert. She told him of cities back east, where streets shone with gaslight and carriages clattered over cobblestones. He listened with wonder, she with awe, both realizing how small their separate worlds truly were. Once, as they watched the sunset bleed into night, Clara asked, "Do you ever wish things could be different?" that our people could live without hatred between them. Taza's jaw tightened. Once I believed it was possible. My father thought peace could be made through words. But when he went to meet the white generals, they gave him whiskey instead of honor and bullets instead of mercy. Clara's eyes burned. Then let me write it. Let me tell your story. The truth, not the lies they spread. Maybe if people read it, he shook his head gently. The white man does not see hearts, only borders, but she saw his pain deep and unhealed. And she swore silently that if the world refused to see him as a man, she would make them see him through her words. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mesas, Taza grew quiet. The soldiers will come again, he said. They do not forgive those who stand against them. You must stay away from the river for a time. Clara's heart twisted. No, she said. You can't ask me that. I would rather see you safe than dead. Without you, she whispered, I would not be living at all. He looked at her then, the war in his soul raging behind his eyes. For a long time he said nothing, only took her hands and pressed them to his chest. Then remember this place, he said. If the world tears us apart, come back to the river. The water remembers. She wanted to speak, to tell him she would follow him anywhere, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she kissed him once more, slow, desperate, memorizing the shape of his mouth, the scent of rain on his skin. When she pulled back, he was already stepping away, the darkness swallowing him whole. That night, the rain stopped. The air hung still, heavy with the ghost of thunder. Clara sat by the river until dawn, her dress clinging to her skin, her heart raw and trembling. She knew what the world would say about a woman like her, that she'd been bewitched, corrupted, lost. But she knew the truth. Love was not the taming of wildness. It was the courage to meet it and not look away. And though the river ran quiet now, she could still feel him there, in every ripple, every whisper of wind through the reeds. The desert had taken much from her, but it had also given her something rare and eternal, a love born not of safety, but of freedom, the kind of love that once found could never truly be lost. The summer of 1878 turned cruel. The rain that once sang on the river's skin vanished, leaving the land cracked and bitter. The San Pedro Valley lay silent under a white-hot sun, and with each passing day, the air itself seemed to hum with dread. Clara Whitmore felt it before she saw it. The shift in the wind, the uneasy restlessness in the horses tethered near her cabin, the faint smell of gunpowder that drifted on the air. The soldiers had returned. She'd spent the morning gathering herbs by the cottonwoods, but her heart was elsewhere. Across the desert, with Taza, wherever he might be hiding his people. When she heard the faint echo of hooves in the distance, she froze. Within minutes, a column of cavalry thundered into sight, the American flag snapping harshly in the wind. At their head rode Captain Harlan, his jaw hard as carved stone, his eyes the color of cold steel. Miss Whitmore, he barked, dismounting. We meet again. Clara straightened, dust streaking her skirt. Captain, I warned you before, he said. You've been aiding hostiles. You think we don't know? Apache raiding parties don't vanish into thin air. They've had help. He glanced at her satchel of herbs. Supplies, medicine, food, perhaps. You call that science? Her pulse raced, but she stood her ground. I call it humanity. He laughed once without mirth. You're in no position to lecture me about humanity, ma'am. You've crossed into dangerous ground. And what ground is that? She demanded. The kind where loyalty is tested. Behind him, a soldier rifled through her belongings, scattering her journals, her drawings, her field notes, her sketches of the Apache people. One of them lifted a page with Taza's likeness sketched upon it. Harlan's eyes darkened. So it's true, he said quietly. You're in league with him. I am not your enemy, Clara said. The Apache are defending their home. You burn their lands, poison their wells, and call it justice. Harlan's voice turned sharp as a blade. They slaughter settlers, Miss Whitmore. Men, women, children. And if you stand with them, you stand against the flag. The flag does not make cruelty right, she said. Trembling, something flickered in his gaze. Pity, perhaps. Or contempt. You've got a fine education and a soft heart. But out here, both will get you killed. He turned to his men. Burn it. Clara's breath caught. No. But the soldiers had already struck a match. Flames leapt to life, devouring her papers, her sketches, her father's notes, the very purpose that had brought her west. Smoke rose into the sky, black and bitter. When it was done, the captain mounted his horse. "You've got one chance to leave this place," he said. "Go back east, forget whatever nonsense you think you've found here, because next time I won't be so charitable." The thunder of hooves faded, leaving her amid the ashes. She fell to her knees, tears streaking through the soot on her face. For a long time she stayed that way, until a whisper broke through the silence. "Clara." She looked up. Through the haze of smoke, Taza emerged. He moved like a shadow through the trees, his eyes burning with fury. He knelt beside her, lifting her from the ground. "You should not have stayed," he said. "They destroyed everything," she said, choking back a sob. He looked at the smoldering remains of her cabin, the broken glass, the blackened journals. "The white man's fire burns without reason," he said darkly. "But he has made his choice. Now we must make ours. Taza, please, it is too late for peace." Her heart twisted. She could see the war building in him, fierce and unstoppable. "If you go to them, they'll kill you. All of you," he met her gaze. "If we run, they will still come. Better to fight and die free than live like dogs." Lightning split the horizon, born dry, soundless, like a warning from the heavens. "Taza, I beg you," she said. "Don't let hate take what love has built." His expression softened at her words, but only slightly. "Love cannot stop bullets, Clara." She took his hand, gripping it tightly. "Then let me stand with you." He stared at her, torn between pride and pain. "You do not belong in war. I belong where you are." He exhaled slowly, as if her courage both broke and healed him. "Then ride with me," he said. They fled into the desert that night, beneath a sky bruised with stormlight. Taza led her through dry riverbeds and narrow canyons, his tribe scattered and hiding in secret places known only to them. For days, they rode, sleeping little, drinking from rain-caught stones, moving like ghosts across the land. The soldiers were relentless, always a day behind. Smoke from distant fires marked their path. On the fifth night, exhaustion claimed them. They found shelter in a sandstone hollow above the river, the same river where love had first drawn them together. Clara's body ached. Her hands blistered, her lips dry and cracked. Yet when she looked at Taza, even covered in dust and blood, he seemed untouchable, the last piece of something pure in a world gone mad. As she gathered her strength, he winced, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. "You're hurt," she said, rushing to him. "It's nothing," he muttered. But she saw the truth in the trembling of his hand. She tore a strip of cloth from her dress and pressed it against the wound. "Lie still," she said, her voice firm. She cleaned it with water from her flask and bound it with steady hands. Taza watched her silently, his gaze softening as she worked. "You have the hands of a healer," he said. "I learned from my father," she replied. "But you've taught me more, how to be brave." He smiled faintly. "Bravery is only another word for love." Their eyes met. Two weary souls on the edge of forever. She leaned close, and for a long, quiet moment they forgot the world outside. But dawn brought fire. Gunshots cracked through the air, sharp, merciless. The echo rolled through the canyon. Clara's heart froze. "Taza!" she cried. He was already moving, seizing his rifle. "They found us!" The soldiers were climbing the rocks, their rifles flashing in the sun. Bullets shattered stone near her head. Taza fired once, twice, and the sound thundered through the canyon. "Run!" he shouted. "Back to the river." "No!" she screamed. "I won't leave you." He turned, eyes fierce. "If you die, my soul dies too." She hesitated only a heartbeat, then obeyed, scrambling down the slope as bullets tore through the dust. She reached the riverbank and turned, breath ragged, watching him fight. One man against many. His movements swift and precise, then a shot rang out, and he stumbled. Clara's scream echoed through the canyon. She ran to him, dropping to her knees. Blood darkened his shirt. "No," she whispered. "No, no, please." He caught her hand, his breath shallow. "Do not cry," he said. "This is not the end. Taza, please, stay with me." His fingers brushed her cheek, weak but tender. "The river will remember." His hand fell away. For a long time Clara held him, rocking gently as the river whispered beside them. The soldiers, seeing her cradling the dying man, lowered their guns. Even Captain Harlan paused, hat in hand, the fire gone from his eyes. When the last echo of gunfire faded, the only sound left was the wind. That night, Clara buried Taza by the river, the same place where love had once bloomed. She placed wildflowers on the mound, their petals trembling in the breeze. The moon cast silver light across the water, and for a moment, she swore she saw his reflection, proud, eternal, smiling. She whispered, "You are the river now." And though her heart was shattered, she knew his spirit would flow forever through the desert he had loved, and through her veins, where his courage had taken root. The fire of men had burned her world to ashes, but the iron of her heart, forged in love, would not break. The desert changed after Taza's death. The wind still moved across the mesas, the river still whispered beneath the cottonwoods, but the land itself felt hollow, as though some spirit had left it behind. The soldiers marched back to their fort, their victory as empty as the canyons they'd burned. Only Clara Whitmore remained alone beside the river, where the man she loved had fallen. She built a small shelter there, fashioned from driftwood and stone. It was not much, but it was hers, a quiet defiance against the world that had taken everything else. Each dawn she gathered herbs along the banks, just as she once had, but now she worked not for science, nor for journals back east, but for memory. She spoke to him often, not aloud, but in the silence between her heartbeats. When the wind stirred the cottonwoods, she imagined it was his voice. When the river rippled in moonlight, she thought she saw his reflection there, proud and still as if he stood guard over her. In time, the Apache people came down from the mountains, cautious, broken, mourning their losses. They found her there, still living by the river that had taken their king. Many expected her to have left, to have returned to her own kind, but she had not. "She waits for the one she loves," said an old woman, recognizing her, "and he waits for her in the wind." The tribe accepted her, slowly at first, then with warmth. They gave her a name in their tongue, Iska Chen, the woman who walks with ghosts. Clara didn't mind. In truth, she had never felt more alive. Years passed. The world beyond the desert moved on. Railroads stretched westward, silver mines rose and fell, towns grew fat on whiskey and greed. But the San Pedro Valley remained untouched, still holding its quiet beauty. Travelers who passed through sometimes glimpsed her figure near the water, a woman in white, her hair streaked with sun and time, tending to children or gathering flowers. They spoke of her in hushed tones at saloons and campfires. They called her the white woman of the Apache king. Some said she was mad, waiting for a lover who would never return. Others swore she was blessed, living proof that love could outlast death. None of them truly knew. One spring morning, as golden light poured across the valley, Clara sat with the children of the tribe, teaching them to read from a tattered book she'd once carried from Boston. The boys fidgeted, the girls giggled, their dark eyes bright with curiosity. When one child asked, "Why do you teach us white man's words?" she smiled and said, "Because stories are bridges, little one. They carry us across rivers the world builds between us." After the lesson, she walked alone to the place by the river where wild lilies bloomed, the same place where her love had first begun. She knelt and touched the water. It was cool and clear, and she felt the faint pulse of life beneath her fingers. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I stayed where the river runs." A soft breeze stirred her hair. Somewhere in the distance thunder rolled, not of storm, but of hooves faint and echoing as though the desert itself remembered. She closed her eyes and saw him as he had been, proud and fierce, standing at the edge of the water, his voice low as the wind. "The river remembers." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not born of sorrow. They were the tears of something eternal, grief and grace intertwined. As the years went on, her cabin became a refuge for travelers, lost wanderers, and those seeking healing. She treated the wounded with herbs Taza had once shown her, willow for pain, yucca for cleansing, aloe for burns. Some said her touch cured fevers no doctor could name. She never took payment, only stories. In return, she shared the tale of the Apache king, not as myth, but as truth. She told of his courage, his laughter, his honor, and the love that defied both bullets and borders. Her words spread slowly, carried from mouth to mouth until they became legend. By the time she reached her twilight years, gray-haired and graceful, the world she once knew was gone. The cavalry fort lay abandoned, the town of Silver Creek half buried in dust. but the river still flowed, eternal as memory. One evening, as the sun sank low and the desert glowed with copper light, Clara felt the weight of years settle gently upon her. She sat on the same stone by the riverbank where Taza had once stood. "I think," she said softly to the wind, "I'm finally ready to go home." The air grew still. The water shimmered like glass. Then, a whisper. "Clara." She opened her eyes. He was there. Not as a ghost of sorrow, but as he had been that first day, strong, alive, his eyes warm with firelight. The years melted away. She rose to her feet, her heart steady, her body suddenly light as air. Taza extended his hand. "Come," he said, just as he had once before. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. I never stopped. Together they stepped into the water. The river glowed, moonlight spilling like silver over their joined hands, and when the dawn came, there was no sign of her. Only two sets of footprints leading into the current, fading where the water turned to light. The people of the valley mourned her passing, but they did not grieve long. They built a small cairn of stones by the river and marked it with a carving. "Here rests Iska-chen, the woman who walked between worlds." And every spring, when the lilies bloomed and the desert breathed again, a strange thing happened. Two eagles circled above the valley, their shadows twining as one over the river's surface. Some said it was merely nature's doing. Others, with wiser hearts, knew better. They said the Apache king and his desert rose still walked the river together, not in this world or the next, but in the quiet place between where love outlives time. The children grew up hearing her story, and they passed it down through generations, the tale of a woman who crossed the borders of blood and nation to find her heart in the most unlikely of places, and long after the desert, winds had erased the names of forts and towns. The story remained. They said that when the sun sets red over the San Pedro, you can still see them, a woman in white, her hand in a warrior's, standing in the shallows of the river that bound them forever.